The rope felt rough against Thomas McKenna's calloused hands as the rain pounded relentlessly on his broad shoulders. The man before him, a horse thief caught red-handed with Tom's gelding, stood trembling on a wooden crate beneath the great oak tree, his hands bound behind his back, the makeshift noose secure around his neck. "Please," the thief begged, rain streaming down his gaunt face. "I got children. Sarah would—" Tom's hand froze on the rope. "What did you say?" "My sister Sarah," the man whimpered. "She'd care for my young'uns if I was gone, but she passed last winter from the fever." The name cut through Tom like a bayonet. 6 months since he'd buried his own Sarah, and still the mere mention of her name could stop his heart. The rage that had fueled him moments ago drained away, leaving only the hollow emptiness that had become his constant companion. With a swift movement, Tom sliced through the rope with his hunting knife. The thief collapsed to his knees, gasping. "Take your horse and go," Tom said, his voice as cold as the Texas rain. "If I see you within 50 miles of here again, I won't stop next time." As the thief scurried away into the darkness, Tom stood motionless beneath the oak. What had he become? A man who would hang another over a horse. The war had taught him to kill, but Sarah had been the one who taught him to live. Without her, he seemed capable only of the former. Captain Thomas McKenna, formerly of the 1st U.S. Sharpshooters under General Sherman's command, now reduced to a drifting cowhand with nothing but memories and nightmares. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could pick off a Confederate officer at 800 yards, but he couldn't save his wife from a fever that swept through their small Colorado homestead like wildfire. The rain intensified as Tom made his way back to the small room he rented above Whitaker's General Store in Millfield, Texas. 6 months of drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, taking work where he could find it, moving on before anyone could ask too many questions, or worse, offer too much sympathy. Sarah's journal lay on the bedside table, its leather cover worn from his constant handling. He knew every word by heart, but still opened it each night as if searching for some passage he might have missed some hidden message that would make sense of his fractured existence. "I believe every living creature deserves a second chance, Tom," she had written. "Even the broken ones. Especially the broken ones." Tom ran his fingers across her delicate handwriting, remembering how she would take in every stray animal that wandered onto their homestead, how she'd nurse them back to health with a patience he could never fathom. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. "Mr. McKenna?" The thin voice of Mrs. Whitaker, the shopkeeper's wife, called from the hallway. "There's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent legal business." Tom opened the door to find Mrs. Whitaker standing beside a slender man in an expensive suit clutching a leather portfolio. Everything about him, from his polished shoes to his carefully trimmed mustache, spoke of city ways and Eastern education. "Captain McKenna," the man said with a slight bow. "Harold Whitman, attorney at law. I've been searching for you for quite some time." Tom frowned. "I'm not a captain anymore. Just McKenna will do." "Of course," Whitman nodded undeterred. "May I come in? What I have to discuss is rather sensitive." Once inside, Whitman carefully removed several documents from his portfolio, laying them on the small wooden table, with the precision of a man who believed in the power of paperwork. "Your great-uncle, Colonel Jeremiah McKenna, passed away 3 months ago," Whitman began. "He has named you as his sole heir to Blackwater Ranch, approximately 15 miles north of here." Tom stared at the lawyer. "There must be some mistake. I never knew any Colonel Jeremiah McKenna." "Nevertheless, he knew of you." Whitman slid a sealed envelope across the table. "He left specific instructions that this property was to pass to you, along with its unique contents." Unique contents. The colonel was somewhat eccentric in his final years, Whitman explained carefully. The ranch has been maintained by a caretaker named William Santos, but I understand he has recently departed due to ill health. The property now stands, well, not entirely abandoned according to local accounts. Tom broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a heavy iron key and a letter written in a strong, deliberate hand that sloped to the right, the hand of someone accustomed to giving orders. Thomas, by the time you read this, I will have joined the countless souls who preceded us to whatever awaits beyond this life. We have never met, though I have followed your journey from afar. I leave to you Blackwater Ranch, and all it contains not as a burden, but as an opportunity. What you choose to do with this inheritance is your decision alone, but I pray you will come to understand why I have selected you above all others. The key opens more than just gates, Thomas. It opens possibilities. Your uncle Colonel Jeremiah McKenna returns, Confederate States Army. Tom's head snapped up. Confederate? He looked at Whitman with narrowed eyes. My uncle fought for the South. Whitman shifted uncomfortably. The colonel was a complex man. After the war, he became known for rather unconventional views that endeared him to neither side. Regardless, the property is legally yours. After Whitman departed, Tom sat on the edge of his bed, turning the heavy iron key over in his hands. Confederate. The word alone stirred a cold anger in his gut. He'd spent 4 years of his life hunting men who fought under that flag, had watched friends die beneath it, had nearly died himself at Antietam when a Confederate bullet found his shoulder. And now one of those men, an officer no less, had left him a ranch. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts again. "Sheriff wants a word, Mr. McKenna," Mrs. Whitaker called. Sheriff Clayton was a barrel-chested man with steel-gray hair and the measured movements of someone who had seen his share of violence. His badge gleamed against his dust-covered coat as he stepped into Tom's small room. "Heard you've come into some property," Clayton said, settling his considerable frame onto the room's only chair. "Thought you might want to know what you're getting yourself into." You knew Colonel McKenna. Clayton's weathered face remained carefully neutral. Everyone around here knew of him, came here right after the surrender at Appomattox, kept to himself mostly, though he employed a fair number of men over the years, unusual sorts that didn't fit elsewhere. Unusual how? Former slaves, Union deserters, Confederate soldiers who couldn't go home, men with no place in the world as it was rebuilding itself. Clayton studied Tom's face. Made him enemies among certain elements in town, particularly Nathan Garrett. Who's Garrett? Owns the largest spread in the county. Former Confederate cavalry. Leads what they call the Gray Brotherhood men who think the war never really ended. Clayton leaned forward. They've had their eye on Blackwater since before the colonel took ill. Good water rights. Prime grazing land. And now they'll have to deal with a Union sharpshooter instead, Tom said flatly. Clayton's expression hardened. That kind of talk won't serve you well in Millfield, McKenna. The war's been over for 18 years, but not in every man's heart. Tread careful. He stood to leave. Oh, and one more thing. Whatever you find at Blackwater, don't be too quick to judge. The colonel had his reasons. The following dawn found Tom riding north, the iron key hanging from a leather cord around his neck, alongside the simple gold band that had once been Sarah's wedding ring. He'd packed light clothes, tools, Sarah's journal, and enough provisions for a few days. His Springfield rifle was secured in its scabbard, a habit from the war he'd never abandoned. The Texas landscape stretched before him, a vast expanse of scrubland dotted with mesquite and oak. As the miles passed, Tom couldn't help but wonder what kind of man his uncle had been. A Confederate colonel who employed former slaves, who made enemies of his own kind. Nothing about it made sense. The road narrowed to little more than a cattle trail as he rode, until finally he crested a small rise and saw it Blackwater Ranch. The property spread across a gentle valley bisected by a silver ribbon of creek. A two-story farmhouse stood at its center, flanked by a large red barn and several outbuildings. In the distance, fences traced the contours of the land, though many appeared broken or sagging. But it was the entrance that stopped Tom cold. Two tall posts topped with carved horse heads supported a wrought-iron arch bearing the name Blackwater Ranch in letters that had once been painted white. The gate itself was a masterpiece of metalwork featuring intertwined horseshoes and what appeared to be cavalry sabers. As Tom approached, he noticed the heavy padlock securing the chain that held the gate closed. The key from Jeremiah fit perfectly, though the mechanism turned with a grinding protest that sent a shower of rust flakes to the ground. The moment the gate swung open, Tom felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the same feeling he'd experienced in the war just before an ambush. Something about the ranch felt expectant, watchful. He urged his horse forward along the main drive, noting signs of neglect everywhere. Broken fence posts, overgrown paths, equipment left to rust in the elements. Yet something about the neglect felt deliberate, as if the abandonment were only skin deep. A sound broke the silence. A horse's whinny, clear and strong. Tom reined his mount to a stop, listening intently. The sound came again, joined by another from a different direction. He continued forward, rounding a bend in the drive that opened into a large clearing before the farmhouse. What Tom saw there defied every expectation. Animals. Dozens, no hundreds of them scattered across the yard and pastures beyond. Horses grazing near the barn, their ribs showing, but their eyes alert. Cattle clustered around a stock tank. Chickens pecking at the ground. Sheep, goats, even a few pigs rooting in a pen beside the barn. Tom dismounted slowly, his mind struggling to make sense of the scene. These weren't wild animals that had wandered onto abandoned property. These were domestic creatures that showed signs of care, albeit minimal. A movement near the house caught his attention. A horse was approaching a mare so pale gray she appeared almost silver in the morning light. She walked with the measured dignity of advanced age, her gait slightly stiff, favoring her left foreleg. But what struck Tom most were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and fixed on him with an assessment that felt unnervingly human. As she drew closer, Tom noticed something else, a distinctive pattern of scarring across her left flank, a pattern he recognized instantly. "My God," he whispered, "you're a cavalry mount." The mare stopped just beyond arm's reach, her breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. The scars on her flank were unmistakable, the result of a minié ball, the same kind Tom had fired countless times during the war. With a trembling hand, Tom reached out. The mare stepped forward, allowing him to stroke her neck. As he did more, animals began to approach, not rushing, but moving with purpose, with hope. A dog emerged from beneath the porch tail, wagging cautiously. Chickens clustered around his feet. A small herd of sheep moved closer, led by an ancient ram with curved horns. "How many of you are there?" Tom murmured. The mare Belle, he would later name her for her bearing, nudged his shoulder gently. In her dark eyes, Tom saw something he recognized from the war resilience in the face of abandonment. These animals had been waiting. For food, for care, for someone to take responsibility. For him. As Tom stood surrounded by the hopeful faces of creatures who had somehow survived against the odds, he felt the weight of choice pressing down upon him. He could turn around, lock the gate, return to Millfield and sell the property to Garrett, or anyone else who would take it. Or he could stay and face whatever mystery his uncle had left behind. The silver mare nudged him again, more insistently this time. Tom found himself thinking of Sarah's journal, of her belief that broken things deserved care, that healing came from the act of helping others heal. "All right," Tom said softly, more to himself than to the animals. "All right, let's see what we've got here." His first discovery was the water system. Following Bell's lead, Tom found a network of hand-carved wooden troughs arranged in a configuration that allowed rainwater collected from the barn roof to flow down through a series of channels to various animal enclosures. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each trough hewn from a single piece of oak fitted with iron bands that showed minimal rust despite their age. The largest trough bore carved initials JM 1878. Inside the barn, Tom found more evidence of careful planning. Stalls had been modified to accommodate animals of various sizes. Feeding stations were positioned at different heights. A tack room contained equipment that had been maintained and organized, including bridles and halters necessary for handling the horses. Most surprising was a notebook hanging from a nail beside the barn door. The pages were weathered, but the handwriting was clear, and entries were dated as recently as 2 weeks prior, May 15, 1883. Fed North Pasture horses. Bell's leg troubling her again. Applied poultice. Red cow delivered calf. Both well. Need to repair fence by creek before next rain. Tom leafed through the notebook, growing more confused with each entry. Someone had been caring for these animals until very recently, someone who knew them individually and tracked their needs with dedication. Following a well-worn path from the barn, Tom discovered a small cabin approximately a quarter-mile from the main house. The structure was modest but solid, with a narrow porch and a stone chimney. Inside, he found evidence of recent habitation, a neatly made bed, cooking utensils hanging from hooks, clothes folded in a small chest. On a rough-hewn table lay more notebooks filled with animal observations and a letter addressed simply, "To whoever comes next." "My name is William Santos. I worked for Colonel McKenna for 15 years before he passed. He made me promise to care for the animals until his heir arrived. I did my best, but my health is failing, and I cannot continue alone. The Colonel saved these animals and me when no one else would. They trust humans because of his kindness and my care. But they need someone stronger now. I have gone to live with my daughter in San Antonio. The animals are waiting. P.S. Check behind the Colonel's portrait in the main house. He left something for his nephew." Tom sat heavily on the cabin's only chair, the letter trembling in his hands. What kind of man saves animals during a time when most people could barely feed themselves? What kind of Confederate colonel leaves his property to the nephew who fought against everything he stood for? As evening approached, Tom realized he'd spent the entire day exploring and had barely begun to address the animals' immediate needs. Many were gathering near the feeding stations he'd discovered, looking at him with expectant eyes. Using feed and hay he found in the barn, Tom began the process of feeding those creatures closest to the house. Their gratitude was palpable, expressed in soft, nickering, gentle nudges and watchful eyes. That night, Tom made his bed on the porch of the main house, unwilling to enter until he'd had time to process what he'd discovered. He lay on his bedroll, listening to the nighttime sounds of the ranch horses moving quietly in the pasture cattle, lowing softly the rustle of smaller animals going about their business. For the first time since Sarah's death, Tom fell asleep to sounds other than his own grief. Morning came with a gentle nudging at his shoulder. Tom opened his eyes to find Belle standing over him, her silver mane catching the first light of dawn. Behind her, gathered in a loose semicircle across the yard, stood dozens of animals, all watching, all waiting. After tending to the morning feeding, Tom decided it was time to enter the house itself. The front door key turned smoothly in the lock, suggesting recent use. The interior was dusty, but well preserved. The main room featured handcrafted furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with volumes on veterinary medicine, animal husbandry, and, surprisingly, military history. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of a man in his 60s, dressed in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of a military officer. His face bore a strong resemblance to Tom's father, the same high forehead and deep-set eyes, though the expression was harder, more weathered by experience. Colonel Jeremiah McKenna. Remembering Santos's letter, Tom carefully removed the portrait from the wall. Behind it was a small wall safe with a combination lock. Tom tried various numbers the year of Jeremiah's birth, the year he acquired the ranch, before finally trying the date inscribed on the Union hardtack tin he'd kept from the war. July 3rd, 1863, Gettysburg, the day that had nearly ended Tom's life. The safe swung open. Inside lay a worn leather journal similar to Sarah's several maps, with routes marked in red ink, and a wooden box containing medals both Union and Confederate. But it was the folded paper bearing Tom's name that drew his attention first. Thomas, if you are reading this, then you have accepted the key to Blackwater, at least temporarily. Whether you choose to stay or sell is your decision. But there are things you should know first. The animals you have found are more than livestock. Each one has a story. Many were abandoned by farms ruined in the war, others injured beyond usefulness to their owners, some orphaned by natural disaster or human cruelty. I began collecting them after Gettysburg, when I realized that the true casualties of war extend far beyond human suffering. William Santos can tell you each animal's history should you wish to know. He has been my right hand these 15 years. Trust him as I have. You may wonder why I would leave everything to a nephew I never met, particularly one who fought for the Union. The answer lies in understanding that the divisions that tore this country apart cannot be mended by continuing to honor those divisions. We are more alike than different, you and I. We both fought for what we believed was right. We both survived when many did not. And we both must find a way to live with the things we did in the name of cause and country. Blackwater has been my redemption. Perhaps it can be yours as well. Your Uncle J.M. Tom lowered the letter, his hand trembling slightly. Beneath it in the safe was one final item, a battlefield daguerreotype of a Union sharpshooter, recognizable immediately as a much younger version of himself peering through a scope at Gettysburg. On the back, written in Jeremiah's hand, "The man who shot me. The man who should have killed me. The man to whom I owe my second chance." Tom sank into a nearby chair, the photo clutched in his hand. Memories flooded back the third day at Gettysburg, positioned with his unit to pick off Confederate officers during Pickett's charge. The distinctive gray horse carrying a senior officer. The shot he'd taken a clean hit that had sent the rider tumbling from the saddle. He had shot Jeremiah McKenna, and somehow his uncle had not only survived, but had spent the years since then tracking him down, watching from afar, and ultimately choosing him as heir to this strange sanctuary. Before Tom could process this revelation, he heard hoofbeats approaching from the main road, multiple riders moving fast. He grabbed his Springfield and stepped onto the porch, just as 3 men reined their horses to a stop at the front gate. The leader was immediately recognizable from Sheriff Clayton's description, tall and broad-shouldered with a meticulously groomed beard and the confident posture of a man accustomed to authority. A silver star gleamed on his vest, not a sheriff's badge, but the emblem of the Gray Brotherhood. "You must be McKenna," the man called out. Nathan Garrett, I own the Triple G Ranch bordering your north pasture. His gaze swept over the animals visible in the yard. I see you've discovered Jeremiah's collection. Tom descended the steps slowly, rifle held casually but ready. What can I do for you, Mr. Garrett? I've come to make you a fair offer for this property, Garrett said, his voice carrying the lingering accent of Virginia plantation country. The old man let it fall into disrepair. These animals are half-starved and worthless as livestock. The land, however, has excellent water rights. Not interested in selling. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. You misunderstand. I'm not asking. Yankees aren't welcome in Millfield, McKenna, especially Yankees who served under Sherman. The war's been over for 18 years, Tom replied evenly. Not in Texas, it ain't. Garrett nodded toward the animals. You've got 3 days to clear this property of these abominations. After that, the town council will be forced to act on grounds of public health. Public health? Disease spreads quickly from neglected animals, Garrett said, gesturing to his companions. Dr. Rawlins here can testify to the danger. We've had reports of sick cattle, diseased sheep. The council takes such threats very seriously. Tom recognized the tactic, the same one used to force freed slaves off land they'd legally acquired after the war. Create a pretext. Apply pressure. Take what you want. These animals aren't sick, Tom said. And they're not going anywhere. Garrett's expression hardened. 3 days, McKenna. Then we'll see if your Union pride is worth dying for. As the riders turned back toward town, Tom noticed movement in the nearby trees, a figure on horseback observing the confrontation from a distance. The rider was smaller, possibly a woman, though at this distance he couldn't be certain. Belle approached, her eyes on the retreating riders. Tom stroked her neck absently, his mind racing with new questions. Why had Jeremiah really chosen him? What was the connection between the animals and the mysterious routes marked on the maps in the safe? And why was Garrett so determined to seize this particular property? As if in answer, Belle turned and began walking deliberately toward the barn. Tom followed, watching as she stopped at a section of the eastern wall and pawed at the ground. The behavior seemed odd for a horse, almost deliberate. Tom examined the area and noticed something peculiar. The dirt before the wall was packed hard, as if it had been traversed frequently. The wooden planks of the barn wall looked identical to the rest surrounding them, but when Tom pressed against one section, he felt it give slightly under pressure. A hidden door. With careful manipulation, a section of wall swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the barn. Tom retrieved a lantern from the tack room and descended the stairs. What he found below stole his breath away. The basement was large, far larger than the barn's footprint would suggest. Rough-hewn support beams created a network of small rooms. Each space contained bedding, basic supplies, and in some cases personal belongings that appeared to have been left in haste. But it was the wall at the far end that revealed the truth. There, painted in careful block letters, Underground Railroad, Western Route. For all souls seeking freedom from bondage. Esther, 1866, by Colonel J. McKenna, CSA Rarpin, and Dr. E. Morrison. Below the inscription was a list of names with dates, dozens of them, spanning nearly 2 decades. The most recent entry was dated just 1 month earlier. Tom ran his fingers across the names, his mind struggling to reconcile this discovery with everything he thought he knew about Confederate officers and Texas ranchers. Jeremiah McKenna, former colonel in the Army that fought to preserve slavery, had been operating an underground railroad station for freed slaves facing persecution during reconstruction. A sound from above startled Tom from his thoughts, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot, followed by panicked animal cries. He raced up the stairs and out of the barn to find chaos in the yard. Several men on horseback were driving a herd of cattle toward the front gate, firing shots into the air to panic the animals. Among them, Tom recognized Garrett's companions from earlier. Without hesitation, Tom raised his Springfield and fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt directly in the lead rider's path. The man reined his horse hard, nearly tumbling from the saddle. "Next one goes through your hat," Tom called, already reloading with the practiced efficiency that had made the Union sharpshooters so feared. "Get off my land!" The riders hesitated, clearly not having expected armed resistance. "This is just the beginning, Yankee," one shouted. "Garrett says the animals go one way or another." As the men retreated, Tom noticed movement again at the edge of the property, the same figure he'd seen earlier, now closer. This time, he could see it was indeed a woman dressed in practical riding clothes, her hair secured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She remained for a moment observing, then turned her horse and disappeared into the trees. Tom spent the remainder of the day checking on the animals, ensuring none had been injured in the raid. The incident confirmed what he had already suspected: Garrett wanted more than just the land. He wanted to erase whatever Jeremiah had been doing here. As dusk fell, Tom sat on the porch, Sarah's journal in one hand and Jeremiah's in the other. Two people who had never met, but who seemed to share the same vision that healing came through helping the forgotten and abandoned. A soft sound drew his attention to the road. A single rider was approaching, moving slowly and deliberately as if to broadcast peaceful intentions. As they drew closer, Tom recognized the figure from earlier, a woman in her 40s with streaks of premature gray in her dark hair. She stopped at the gate, but made no move to enter. "Captain McKenna," she called. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Colonel Jeremiah McKenna." Tom approached cautiously, rifle in hand. "You're the doctor mentioned in the basement." She nodded, her expression a mixture of caution and resolve. "Jeremiah and I worked together for many years. I saw Garrett's men here earlier. I think it's time you and I had a conversation about what's really happening at Blackwater Ranch." Tom studied Dr. Elizabeth Morrison carefully as she dismounted at the gate. Her clothing was practical but well-made, her movements efficient and confident. The medical bag she carried looked worn from years of use. "I'd invite you in," Tom said, "but I'm not entirely sure who's friend or foe around here." Dr. Morrison's smile was brief but genuine. "A wise approach, Captain. I'd expect nothing less from one of Berdan's sharpshooters." She gestured toward the front gate. "May I?" Tom unlatched the gate, still keeping his rifle within reach. Belle approached immediately, nickering softly at the doctor's arrival. "Hello, old friend," Dr. Morrison murmured, stroking the mare's silver mane. "Still keeping watch, I see." "You know this horse?" Tom asked. "I know all of Jeremiah's charges." She turned to Tom, her expression serious. Belle was his mount at Gettysburg. She took the same bullet that found him, the one you fired. Tom felt a chill run through him, despite the warm evening air. "How do you know it was me?" "Jeremiah knew. He remembered seeing you through his field glasses just before you took the shot. Said you were positioned in a copse of trees near the Union left flank. He was leading a reconnaissance when you spotted him." She patted Belle's neck. "The bullet passed through him and into Belle's flank. Both survived, obviously." Tom's mind raced with questions, but one seemed most pressing. Why would he leave his property to the man who shot him? That, Dr. Morrison said, is a long story best told inside. "You've found the basement, I presume." Inside the main house, Dr. Morrison moved with the familiarity of someone who had spent considerable time there. She lit several lamps and settled into a chair near the fireplace, while Tom built a small fire to ward off the evening chill. "Jeremiah and I met in the aftermath of Gettysburg," she began. "I was a field nurse with the Union forces. He was brought to our tent barely alive. Confederate officer or not, we treated all the wounded the same." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "He was different from other Confederate officers I'd treated. No ranting about the cause or cursing the Yankees. Just quiet determination to survive. When he was well enough to be transported to a prison hospital, he asked me to check on his horse Belle. Said she was all he had left in the world." Tom listened intently as Dr. Morrison continued her story. After the war, she had moved to Texas to establish a medical practice in an area desperate for doctors. By coincidence or fate, she encountered Jeremiah again when he purchased Blackwater Ranch in 1866. "The war changed him," she said. "Changed us all." Jeremiah came to believe that the true sin of the conflict wasn't just slavery, but the dehumanization that allowed men to view others, human or animal, as property to be used and discarded. "So he started collecting strays," Tom said, gesturing toward the window where several horses could be seen grazing in the moonlight. "It began with animals, yes. Horses too old to work. Cattle too injured to sell. Dogs abandoned by families moving west." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "But after the failure of Reconstruction, when freed slaves faced new forms of persecution, Jeremiah expanded his mission. The Underground Railroad in the basement," she nodded. "A route for former slaves and their families to escape the violence of the Klan and similar groups. We've moved over 200 people through Blackwater in the last 15 years, most to Mexico or California." "We?" Tom asked sharply. "Myself, Jeremiah William Santos, and a network of others who believe that the promises of freedom should be more than empty words." Her gaze was steady, challenging. "Does that trouble you, Captain?" Tom thought of the war, of the ideals he had fought for, of the bitter reality that had followed. "No, but it explains why Garrett wants this land so badly. Nathan Garrett was a slave hunter before the war, made his fortune tracking down runaways for plantation owners." Dr. Morrison's voice hardened. "After the war, he reinvented himself as a cattle baron, but his true business has always been hunting people. He suspects what Blackwater really is, but hasn't been able to prove it." Until now, Tom stood pacing the room. If Jeremiah's gone and Santos has left, the operation is effectively shut down. Not quite. Dr. Morrison rose as well. "There's a family arriving tomorrow night. They've been traveling for weeks from Louisiana. Their daughter is ill. They can't turn back now." Tom stopped pacing. "You're asking me to continue Jeremiah's work." "I'm telling you what's coming, Captain McKenna. What you do with that information is your choice." She gathered her medical bag. "Jeremiah believed you were the right person to take over Blackwater. He followed your life after the war. He knew about your homestead in Colorado, about Sarah." Tom stiffened. How could he possibly know about Sarah, Doctor? Morrison reached into her bag and withdrew a small packet of letters tied with blue ribbon. "Because she wrote to him." Tom's hands trembled as he accepted the packet. The topmost letter was unmistakably in Sarah's handwriting, addressed to Colonel Jeremiah McKenna, and dated 2 years before her death. "How?" Tom whispered. "She found his name among your father's papers and reached out to him. They corresponded for nearly 2 years." Dr. Morrison's voice softened. "She shared your dreams of a place where you could take in animals that others had given up on. Jeremiah recognized a kindred spirit. Tom sat heavily staring at the letters. She never told me. She was planning to. According to her last letter, she wanted to introduce you to Jeremiah in person. Dr. Morrison moved toward the door. Read them, Captain, then decide what Blackwater means to you. As she reached the threshold, she turned back. The family arriving tomorrow, James and Mary Washington and their daughter Emma. They'll come by the North Trail after midnight. Garrett's men patrol the main roads. She hesitated. If you choose not to help them, send word to the milliner's shop in town. Ask for Mrs. Branson. She'll arrange an alternative. After Dr. Morrison departed, Tom sat by the fire, Sarah's letters spread before him. Her words, so familiar in their careful script, so shocking in their content, revealed a side of his wife he had never fully known. Colonel McKenna, I hope you will forgive my boldness in writing to you. I found your name among my husband's father's papers and learned you are his great-uncle. Tom speaks often of wishing he had family left in this world, and it occurred to me that perhaps you are the answer to that wish. Tom doesn't know I'm writing. He carries such burden from the war still. The skills that kept him alive, his marksmanship, his ability to distance himself from the moment of taking a life, now haunt him in peace. He wakes some nights calling out coordinates for shots taken years ago. We have built a small homestead in Colorado. It isn't much, but it's ours. I've begun taking in injured animals that others would simply destroy, a practice Tom indulges with bemused patience. But I've seen how he changes when nursing a fawn back to health or splinting a hawk's broken wing. For those brief moments, the war leaves his eyes. I dream of expanding this work someday, of creating a true sanctuary for creatures others deem worthless. Perhaps it's foolish, but I believe there's healing in caring for the abandoned, not just for them, but for the caregiver as well. If you would be willing to correspond, I would be most grateful. Tom needs to know he isn't alone in this world. Respectfully, Sarah McKenna. Subsequent letters chronicled the development of their Colorado homestead, Sarah's expanding rescue work, and Jeremiah's responses encouraging her vision. The final letter, dated just weeks before her death, brought tears to Tom's eyes. Dear Jeremiah, for I feel I may call you that now, after 2 years of correspondence, your latest letter brought such joy. The idea that Tom and I might visit Blackwater next spring makes my heart sing. I believe seeing your work there would inspire him as your letters have inspired me. I have news I haven't yet shared with Tom. The doctor confirms I am with child approximately 10 weeks along. Tom will make such a wonderful father. He has such gentleness with creatures that need tending, such patience with the broken and fearful. I plan to tell him tonight and can already imagine his joy. This child will grow up surrounded by our sanctuary, learning compassion through example. Perhaps this news makes our visit even more important. I want our child to know their family, small as it may be. I want Tom to see that his legacy extends beyond the war, beyond even our modest work here. Until spring. With deepest affection, Sarah. Tom pressed the letter to his chest, grief washing through him anew. Sarah had been carrying their child when the fever took her, a child he had never known existed, a family that would never be. And she had been planning to bring him to Blackwater to introduce him to the great uncle he'd never known, the Confederate officer he'd shot at Gettysburg. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. Dawn found Tom still awake. Sarah's letters, carefully returned to their ribbon-binding Jeremiah's journal, open before him. The colonel's entries provided a meticulous record of the Underground Railroad operations routes, contacts, close calls with authorities. But interspersed with these practical matters were philosophical reflections that revealed a man grappling with his own transformation. May 1866. I wonder what my men would think of me now. The officer who once led them in defense of the Confederacy now works to secure the freedom promised by Union victory. They would call me traitor. Perhaps I am. But to betray a dishonorable cause is no dishonor. December 1869. Morrison says I seek redemption through this work. Perhaps. But redemption implies the possibility of balancing scales that can never be balanced. No amount of lives saved can resurrect those lost under my command. This is not redemption. It is purpose. August 1879. Received first letter from Sarah McKenna today. The wife of the Union sharpshooter who nearly ended my life at Gettysburg now writes seeking family connection. God's sense of humor is both terrible and wonderful. Tom closed the journal as morning light spilled through the windows. Belle stood at the porch railing, watching him through the open door, her dark eyes patient. "What would Sarah want me to do?" Tom asked aloud. Belle nickered softly as if in answer. The day passed in a blur of activity as Tom tended to the animals' repaired broken fencing near the creek and prepared for the possibility of visitors in the night. He cleaned and organized the basement spaces, ensuring fresh bedding and supplies were available. He positioned his rifle within easy reach of the porch and saddled his horse in case a quick departure became necessary. As dusk approached, Tom noticed movement along the property's northern boundary riders, moving slowly through the trees, too distant to identify, but clearly surveilling the ranch. Garrett's men most likely watching for exactly what was planned for tonight. Darkness fell, bringing with it a tense silence, broken only by the natural sounds of the ranch at night. Tom sat on the porch, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of approaching riders. Just after midnight, Belle suddenly raised her head, ears pricked forward toward the north trail. Tom followed her gaze, but saw nothing in the moonless night. Then he heard it, the faint creak of wagon wheels moving slowly, cautiously. Tom grabbed his rifle and moved toward the sound, using the darkness for cover. As he approached, he could make out the silhouette of a small wagon drawn by a single horse, moving at barely more than a walking pace, lights extinguished. He stepped into the path, rifle lowered but ready. "Hold there." The wagon stopped immediately. A man's voice tense with fear. "We're looking for Blackwater, for Colonel McKenna." "The colonel's dead," Tom replied. "I'm McKenna. Thomas McKenna." There was a moment of silence, then, "Dr. Morrison said you might help us. My daughter's sick. We've come a long way." Tom approached the wagon carefully. In the dim starlight, he could make out a black man in his 30s, a woman beside him cradling a small form wrapped in blankets, and two young boys huddled in the wagon bed. "Follow me," Tom said. "Stay quiet. Garrett's men are watching the main road." He led them along a back trail to the barn, where he had prepared the hidden basement. The woman Mary descended the stairs carefully, still holding the child. The girl couldn't have been more than 6, her small frame burning with fever, her breathing labored. "How long has she been like this?" Tom asked, helping the Father James unhitch their horse. 3 days, James replied, his voice tight with worry. "She was fine when we left Shreveport. Started coughing near Dallas. Gets worse every day. I'll send for Dr. Morrison at first light." As Tom settled the Washington family into the basement, he felt an odd sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. This was what Sarah had envisioned, what Jeremiah had built. A place where the broken and hunted could find safety and healing. The night passed without incident, But dawn brought trouble. As Tom emerged from the barn after checking on the family, he spotted riders approaching from the main road, Garrett, Sheriff Clayton, and two other men. Tom positioned himself on the porch rifle, visible but not aimed. Bell stood nearby, as if sensing the confrontation to come. "Morning, gentlemen," Tom called as they reached the gate. "Something I can help you with." Garrett's face was tight with barely controlled anger. "We received reports of a wagon heading this way last night, carrying fugitives from Louisiana." "Haven't seen any wagon," Tom replied evenly. "Just been tending to the animals." Sheriff Clayton dismounted, his expression uncomfortable. "Tom, we need to search the property. Official business." "You got a warrant, Sheriff." Clayton's mouth tightened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, son. It's a simple question. You have a warrant to search my property." "We don't need one," Garrett cut in. "The Fugitive Slave Act ended with the war," Tom interrupted, 18 years ago, along with slavery itself." Garrett's face flushed dark. "These people are wanted for theft in Louisiana. They stole themselves away from legal employment contracts." "Indentured servitude enforced by threat isn't legal employment," Tom said, his voice hardening. "It's slavery by another name." "You harboring fugitives, McKenna," Garrett demanded. Tom stepped off the porch, moving closer to the gate, his rifle held casually but ready. "I'm running a ranch I inherited legally. Tending animals left in my care. What happens beyond my property line isn't my concern." The standoff continued for several long moments, tension crackling between them like heat lightning. Finally, Clayton broke the silence. "We'll be back with a proper warrant, Tom. Don't do anything foolish in the meantime." He mounted his horse, nodding to Garrett. "Let's go." As they rode away, Garrett turned in his saddle. "The Gray Brotherhood meets tonight, McKenna. Your uncle may have fooled this town for years, but your Union blue shows too plain." Once they were gone, Tom hurried to the barn. James had overheard the confrontation from his hiding place near the door. "They'll be back," Tom said. "We need to move you somewhere safer until nightfall. Then Dr. Morrison can help get you to the next station." James shook his head. "Emma's too sick to travel. Mary says her fever's worse." His eyes pleaded with Tom. "I fought for the Union, same as you. 54th Massachusetts. Thought that would mean something when the war ended. But they're hunting us like we're still property." Tom felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. These people needed more than just a night's shelter. They needed time for the child to heal, for safe passage to be arranged. But harboring them meant risking everything: the ranch, the animals, possibly his life. What would Sarah have done? What had Jeremiah done year after year? "You'll stay," Tom said finally. "But we need to move you from the barn. The house has a root cellar that's harder to find." As Tom helped the family relocate, he spotted a rider approaching from the east, Dr. Morrison medical bag secured to her saddle. She dismounted quickly when she reached the house. "Garrett was just here," Tom told her. "With Clayton. They're coming back with a warrant." Dr. Morrison's expression remained calm. "Then we have work to do before they return. Where's the child?" Tom led her to the root cellar, where little Emma lay shivering, despite the warm day, her breathing shallow and rapid. Dr. Morrison examined her thoroughly, her hands gentle but efficient. "Pneumonia," she said finally. "We need to break the fever and ease her breathing." She began removing items from her medical bag. "I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and someone to help me prepare a mustard plaster." For the next several hours, Tom assisted as Dr. Morrison worked to save the child, following her instructions, precisely watching as she demonstrated the same care for this fugitive girl that she clearly showed to every patient. In her actions, Tom saw echoes of Sarah, the same gentle determination, the same belief that healing was both science and art. By mid-afternoon, Emma's fever had broken her breathing easier, though still labored. Dr. Morrison sat back, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "She needs rest now," she said, "and time to recover fully before attempting any journey." "Time we may not have," Tom replied. "If Clayton returns with that warrant, then we'll face that when it comes." Dr. Morrison's gaze was steady. "What are you going to do, Captain McKenna?" Before Tom could answer, Belle's warning whinny split the air. Tom rushed to the window to see riders approaching not from the direction of town, but from the north woods. Too many to count at this distance, moving fast. "Garrett's not waiting for a warrant," Tom said grimly. "The Gray Brotherhood is coming now." Dr. Morrison moved quickly to the wash basin, cleaning her hands. "Get the Washingtons to the secret room behind the pantry. Jeremiah built it for emergencies." "What secret room?" She gave him a quick, tired smile. "This house has more hiding places than you've discovered, Captain." Tom helped James move his family to the concealed room, a space so cleverly designed that even knowing it was there, he could barely discern its outline when closed. Then he collected his rifle and ammunition. "Stay with them," he told Dr. Morrison. "If this goes badly—" "It won't," she said firmly. "Jeremiah faced down the Brotherhood before. They're cowards at heart." Tom stepped onto the porch. Just as the riders reached the gate, at least 20 men, Garrett at their lead. Many wore pieces of Confederate gray, others had kerchiefs pulled up to mask their faces. All were armed. "That's far enough," Tom called his voice, carrying across the yard. Garrett urged his horse forward, stopping just outside rifle range. "We know they're here, McKenna. The Louisiana runaways. Hand them over, and we'll leave your animals be." "There's no one here but me," Tom replied. "Search the property," Garrett ordered, and several riders began to spread out, moving to surround the house. Tom raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the ground directly in front of Garrett's horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. "Next one won't be a warning," Tom said calmly, already reloading with the practiced efficiency that had made the sharpshooters legendary. Garrett's face twisted with rage. "You're outnumbered 20-1, Yankee." "Good odds for a Berdan sharpshooter," Tom replied. "How many of you want to be first?" The standoff stretched taut, as a bowstring, neither side willing to back down. Tom knew his position was ultimately untenable. He couldn't hold off 20 men indefinitely, but backing down now would mean surrendering not just the Washingtons, but everything Blackwater represented. The tension broke with the sound of a rifle shot, not from Tom or the Brotherhood, but from the direction of town. All eyes turned to see a group of riders approaching, led by Sheriff Clayton. "That's enough, Garrett," Clayton shouted as they drew closer. "This isn't how we do things in Millfield." "Stay out of this, Clayton," Garrett snarled. "The Brotherhood handles its own business." "Not in my jurisdiction." Clayton and his deputies, Tom counted 8, positioned themselves between Garrett's men and the ranch house. "The judge has granted a proper search warrant to be executed according to law, not by a lynch mob." Garrett's face darkened further, but he recognized the shift in advantage. "Fine. Execute your warrant then, Sheriff. Search every inch of this place." Clayton dismounted and approached the porch alone, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. In a low voice, meant only for Tom, he said, "You've got friends in town you didn't know about. Dr. Morrison's been busy this morning." Then louder, "I need to search the premises, Mr. McKenna. Official business." Tom understood immediately. Clayton was offering him a way out, a legal search that would find nothing because those in the search party had no intention of finding anything. "Of course, Sheriff," Tom replied, matching his tone. "I've got nothing to hide." The search lasted over an hour with Clayton and his deputies methodically checking every building while carefully avoiding the actual hiding places. Garrett grew increasingly agitated as room after room was declared empty. "The root cellar," Garrett insisted. "Check under the floorboards in the pantry." Clayton made a show of examining the areas Garrett suggested, even prying up several floorboards, but always just shy of the actual concealed room. Finally, the sheriff returned to the yard where Garrett waited. "Property's clean, Nathan. No sign of any fugitives." "Impossible," Garrett exploded. "They were seen heading this way. Then they moved on," Clayton said firmly. "Either way, we've executed the warrant properly. We're done here." Garrett's eyes burned with hatred as he looked from Clayton to Tom. "This isn't over, McKenna. Not by a long shot." He turned to his men. "Let's go." As the Brotherhood riders departed, Clayton lingered behind. When they were alone, he turned to Tom with a serious expression. "You've made a powerful enemy today," he said. "Garrett won't let this go." "Why did you help us?" Tom asked. Clayton was quiet for a moment. "My youngest brother died at Antietam, Union side. Never found his body." He looked out over the ranch where the animals had begun to emerge from hiding. "Jeremiah knew, helped me look for records after the war. Didn't matter to him that my brother fought for the North." He turned back to Tom. "The war's been over a long time. Some folks just haven't accepted it yet." After Clayton left, Tom returned to the house to find Dr. Morrison tending to Emma, whose color had improved dramatically. "The sheriff?" James asked anxiously. "He knew we were here." "He knew," Tom confirmed, "and chose not to find you." Dr. Morrison smiled tiredly. "Jeremiah always said Clayton was a better man than he pretended to be." As darkness fell, Tom stood on the porch watching the Washington boys playing cautiously with a litter of kittens they'd discovered in the barn. Despite the tension of the day, the scene filled him with a sense of rightness that he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. "They can stay until Emma's well enough to travel," Tom told Dr. Morrison as she joined him. "After that, we'll need to get them safely to the next station." "And then?" she asked quietly. Tom looked out over Blackwater Ranch at the animals grazing peacefully in the evening light, at the buildings that had sheltered so many seekers of freedom, at the legacy Jeremiah had built and Sarah had dreamed of. "Then we'll help the next family that needs it," he said. "And the next." Belle approached the porch, her silver coat gleaming in the twilight. Behind her, the other animals moved through their evening routines, horses settling in the near pasture, cattle gathering by the pond, chickens returning to their roosts. "This is what Sarah wanted," Tom said softly. "What Jeremiah built. A place where healing happens." Dr. Morrison touched his arm lightly. "It's what they both wanted for you too, Thomas. Healing works both ways." As night deepened over Blackwater Ranch, Tom felt something shift inside him, not an end to grief, but perhaps the beginning of purpose. The war that had shaped him, the loss that had hollowed him, the legacy that had found him, all converging on this moment, this choice. He didn't yet know how deeply that choice would cost him. Couldn't foresee that Garrett's hatred would escalate beyond threats to direct action. Didn't realize that by morning, the peaceful routine of Blackwater Ranch would be shattered by flames. For now, he stood watch over a family finding brief safety over animals who had survived abandonment over a vision of healing shared by two people who had never met, but who had both in their own ways saved him. In the distance, a flicker of light caught his eye, torches moving through the darkness approaching from the direction of Garrett's property. The Grey Brotherhood was returning, and this time they weren't coming to search. The torches appeared like fireflies, at first distant pinpricks of light moving through the darkness. But unlike the gentle glow of insects, these flames advanced with purpose, 20, perhaps 30 of them cutting across Garrett's land toward Blackwater Ranch. Tom moved quickly, his mind shifting to the tactical clarity he'd developed during the war. "Get the Washingtons to the basement under the barn," he instructed Dr. Morrison. "It's deeper, more protected." "What are you planning to do?" she asked, already helping Mary gather Emma into her arms. "What Jeremiah would have done." Tom checked his ammunition. "Buy you time." As Dr. Morrison hurried the family toward safety, Tom made rapid preparations. He released the livestock from the nearest paddocks, knowing they would scatter and create confusion. He positioned water barrels near the structures most vulnerable to fire. He gathered his rifle pistol and what little ammunition he had left. Belle followed him, refusing to be shooed away, despite his attempts. The old cavalry mount seemed to sense the coming battle. Her ears pricked forward, her body tense with readiness that belied her age. "You've seen this before, haven't you, girl?" Tom murmured, checking the cinch on his saddle one last time. "So have I." When Dr. Morrison returned, Tom was surprised to see her carrying a rifle of her own, an older model, but well-maintained. At his questioning glance, she simply said, "Jeremiah taught me to shoot. I'm a better doctor than marksman, but I can hit what I aim at." "I need you to ride for Clayton," Tom said. "Garrett's men will try to prevent anyone from reaching town, but you know these back trails better than they do." She shook her head firmly. "Emma still needs medical attention. I won't leave her." Before Tom could argue further, the first riders cleared the tree line at the northern boundary. At least 20 men, some carrying torches, others with rifles gleaming dully in the firelight. They paused at the fence line, regrouping. Tom positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready, but not yet aimed. Dr. Morrison took up position at an upstairs window, her silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Garrett's voice carried across the yard, unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Last chance, McKenna, send out the runaways, and we'll leave your precious animals be." "There's no one here but us, Garrett," Tom called back. "Go home before someone gets hurt." A harsh laugh answered him. "The only one getting hurt tonight is you, Yankee." Garrett raised his arm. "Burn it to the ground, boys." 3 riders broke from the group, racing toward the barn with torches held high. Tom sighted carefully and fired not at the men, but at the torches. His first shot sent a flaming brand spinning into the dirt. His second did the same. The third rider veered away before he could fire again. The night erupted into chaos. Riders charged from multiple directions, some firing wildly toward the house, others attempting to reach the outbuildings with fresh torches. Tom's military training took over methodical, precise shots that targeted weapons and torches rather than men. But they were too many, and he was one man with limited ammunition. A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof of the chicken coop. Another struck the side of the barn, catching quickly in the dry wood. Smoke began to billow, orange flames licking upward. Dr. Morrison appeared beside him, firing at riders approaching the house. "The animals!" she shouted over the gunfire. "We need to free the ones still penned." Tom glanced at the barn, now fully engulfed in flames. The secret basement entrance was at the far side, still untouched by fire. But for how long? "Get the Washingtons out through the tunnel," he told her. "I'll handle the animals." They separated, Tom racing toward the burning barn, while Dr. Morrison headed for the hidden entrance. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet as he ran, but the darkness and confusion worked in his favor. The heat struck him like a physical blow as he reached the barn doors. Inside, horses screamed in terror, kicking at their stalls. Tom fought through smoke and fear, throwing open gates, slapping animals toward safety, counting each one as it fled into the night. When the last horse was free, Tom turned toward the basement entrance and found his path blocked by a wall of flame. The stairs leading down had caught fire, cutting off access to the tunnel that led away from the property. There was no way in, no way to reach the Washingtons if they were still inside. A support beam crashed behind him, sending up a fountain of sparks. Tom barely made it outside before a section of the roof collapsed. He staggered across the yard, lungs, burning eyes streaming from smoke. The chicken coop was fully engulfed now. 2 smaller sheds had caught as well. Garrett's men continued to circle the property, firing occasionally at the house, but mostly watching the destruction with grim satisfaction. Tom made his way to the house, searching desperately for any sign of Dr. Morrison or the Washington family. Had they escaped through the tunnel? Had they been trapped below? As he reached the porch, something struck him from behind, a blow that sent him sprawling face first into the dirt. Tom rolled instinctively, coming up with his pistol drawn, only to find himself staring down the barrel of Garrett's revolver. "End of the line, McKenna," Garrett said, his face twisted with hatred and illuminated by the surrounding fires. "Your Union luck's run out." Tom knew he couldn't raise his weapon fast enough to beat Garrett's trigger finger. This was it, then. At least he'd freed the animals. At least he'd tried to continue what Sarah and Jeremiah had started. The gunshot, when it came, was deafening, but it wasn't from Garrett's revolver. The rancher's face registered surprise, then pain, as his right shoulder blossomed red. He staggered sideways, his shot going wild as he fell. Sheriff Clayton stood at the edge of the yard, rifle still raised, deputies fanning out behind him. "Drop your weapons," he shouted to Garrett's men. "All of you are under arrest." For a moment, it seemed the Brotherhood might fight. They still outnumbered the lawmen, but the sight of their leader bleeding in the dirt seemed to drain their resolve. Weapons clattered to the ground as the deputies moved in. Tom struggled to his feet, coughing from the smoke that now enveloped the property. "The Washingtons," he gasped. "They were in the barn basement." "Dr. Morrison." "We're here," came Dr. Morrison's voice from behind the house. She emerged from the darkness, face smudged with soot, but otherwise unharmed. Behind her came the Washington family, Emma cradled in her mother's arms. "We got out through the root cellar tunnel just before the fire reached the basement." Relief flooded through Tom, so powerful it nearly took his legs from under him. They were safe, all of them. But as he looked around at the burning buildings, at the animals scattered and frightened across the property, at the destruction Garrett had wrought, that relief quickly gave way to grief and anger. Clayton approached, his expression grim. "I'm sorry we didn't get here sooner, Tom. One of Dr. Morrison's patients, a boy named William, rode for us when he saw the Brotherhood gathering." "You came in time," Tom said, watching as deputies secured Garrett with handcuffs despite his wounded shoulder. "That's what matters." "The charges against Garrett won't just be arson," Clayton said quietly. "We found something at his ranch today. Records, names and descriptions of people he's hunted over the years, prices paid for their capture." He met Tom's eyes. "He wasn't just burning your ranch. He was destroying evidence." The night stretched long as the fires were finally brought under control. Neighbors who had been roused by the commotion arrived to help, forming bucket brigades from the creek to douse the remaining flames. By dawn, the full extent of the damage became clear. The barn was gone, reduced to smoldering timbers and ash. The chicken coop and 2 storage sheds were similarly destroyed. The main house had survived largely intact, though one corner of the roof had caught briefly before being extinguished. But it was the animals that broke Tom's heart. Most had escaped the flames, but in the chaos, many had scattered far across neighboring properties. Those that remained huddled in small groups, trembling and disoriented. Belle alone remained close to the house, standing sentinel over a group of younger horses as if protecting them from further harm. As the neighbors departed, and Clayton's deputies took Garrett and his men to the Millfield jail, Tom sat heavily on the porch steps, exhaustion and despair washing over him in equal measure. Dr. Morrison sat beside him, her medical bag open as she treated the burns on his hands and arms, injuries he hadn't even registered in the heat of battle. "What now?" Tom asked, staring at the ruins of the barn where the Underground Railroad station had operated for so many years. "Even if Garrett goes to prison, his brotherhood is still out there, and half of Blackwater is destroyed." Dr. Morrison's hands remained steady as she applied salve to his burns. "We rebuild," she said simply, "just as Jeremiah did after the war. Just as you did after Sarah." The words struck Tom like a physical blow. After Sarah, he hadn't rebuilt. He'd run, abandoned their homestead and the dreams they'd shared, drifted without purpose until fate, or perhaps Jeremiah's careful planning, had brought him to Blackwater. "I don't know if I can—" Tom admitted the confession torn from some deep place he rarely acknowledged. "I don't know if I have that kind of strength left." "You do." James Washington approached his young sons at his side. "What you did last night, standing against all those men to protect my family, that took strength most men will never know." Tom shook his head. "I failed. The barn is gone. The sanctuary Jeremiah built is more than buildings," Dr. Morrison interrupted. "It's purpose, vision, the belief that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds." From across the yard, Belle approached her silver coat, streaked with ash, but her steps as dignified as ever. She stopped before Tom, lowering her head until her eyes were level with his. "She's right," James said quietly. "During the war, I saw men lose limbs, lose brothers, lose everything. Some gave up. Others found a way forward." He gestured toward his family, now safely gathered near the kitchen door, where Mary was preparing what food could be salvaged. "I chose to move forward. For them." Belle nudged Tom's shoulder gently, as if adding her own wordless encouragement. The morning passed in a blur of activity, securing temporary shelter for the animals that remained, salvaging what could be saved from the destroyed buildings, taking inventory of what had been lost. The Washingtons worked alongside Tom and Dr. Morrison, their presence a reminder of why Blackwater existed in the first place. By midday, Sheriff Clayton returned with news. Garrett's being held on multiple charges: arson, attempted murder, illegal detention of freed persons. His expression was grave. But his allies are already gathering. The Gray Brotherhood is claiming this was a justified action against Yankee interference in Texas affairs. "What does that mean for the Washingtons?" Tom asked. "It means they need to move on as soon as possible," Clayton replied. "I can't guarantee their safety once word spreads about what happened here." Dr. Morrison nodded. "Emma's well enough to travel. I can arrange transport to the next station tomorrow night." "And what about Blackwater?" Tommy gestured to the destroyed barn. "Garrett may be in jail, but his brotherhood is still out there. They won't stop because of one setback." Clayton shifted uncomfortably. "That's the other reason I came back. The town council's called an emergency meeting tonight. There's talk of revoking Blackwater's charter." "They can't do that," Dr. Morrison protested. "This land has been legally owned by the McKenna family for nearly 20 years. They can if they declare it a public nuisance or a danger to the community, Clayton explained. Garrett's allies on the council are pushing hard for it. He looked at Tom directly. They want you gone, son. One way or another. After Clayton departed, Tom walked the boundaries of the property, surveying the damage, calculating what it would take to rebuild. The task seemed insurmountable. Not just the physical reconstruction, but the defense against enemies, who wouldn't rest until Blackwater was erased. Belle followed him on his rounds, her presence a silent comfort. When they reached the ruins of the barn, Tom stopped staring at the charred remains of the secret basement where so many had found safety over the years. "What would you do, Sarah?" he whispered, fingering the wedding ring he still wore on a cord around his neck. "What would you have me do now?" As if in answer, a glint of metal caught his eye among the ashes, something reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Tom knelt, brushing away soot and debris, to reveal a small metal box, its surface scorched but intact. The lock had melted in the intense heat, allowing Tom to pry open the lid. Inside, protected by the metal casing, was a packet of documents, deeds, maps, and letters, all bearing Jeremiah's distinctive handwriting. Among them was an envelope addressed to Thomas McKenna, with the simple notation, "In case of fire." Tom almost laughed at the grim foresight. Of course, Jeremiah would have prepared for this possibility. The old Confederate colonel had survived too many battles not to anticipate every contingency. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper dated just 3 months before Jeremiah's death. Thomas, if you are reading this, then Blackwater has faced its greatest test, and you have chosen to stand your ground rather than flee. For that alone I thank you. Enclosed you will find duplicate deeds to the property and adjacent lands I acquired over the years. Also included are letters of support from influential figures who have benefited from Blackwater's existence. Politicians, military officers from both North and South, clergymen, and businessmen who remember their own journey through our sanctuary. Use these wisely. The enemies of freedom rarely fight fair, so we must use every legitimate advantage. One final note: in the southeast corner of the property, beneath the old oak where 3 stones form a triangle, you will find a cache of weapons and ammunition. I pray you never need them, but a soldier knows better than to face battle unarmed. Stand firm, nephew. Reconstruction failed because good men tired of the fight too soon. Some battles must be won not once, but again and again, until justice becomes habit rather than exception. Colonel J. McKenna. Tom read the letter twice, then carefully examined the other documents. The deeds were all in order, legally filed and witnessed. The letters of support came from names he recognized: a senator from Massachusetts, 2 generals, 1 Union, 1 Confederate, the governor of Illinois, and, surprisingly, a Supreme Court justice. The evening found Tom at the town council meeting, seated beside Dr. Morrison in the crowded schoolhouse that served as Millfield's public hall. The council members sat at a long table at the front of the room, their faces illuminated by oil lamps that cast long shadows across the rough wooden walls. Mayor Davidson, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous manner, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address the disturbance at Blackwater Ranch and to determine what action, if any, the town should take regarding its continued operation." Councilman Peters, whom Tom recognized as one of Garrett's closest allies, stood immediately. "This isn't a disturbance we're discussing. It's harboring fugitives, resisting lawful search, and endangering the entire community with radical abolitionist activities that should have ended with the war." Murmurs of agreement rose from one section of the crowd, men Tom recognized as associates of the Grey Brotherhood. "Nathan Garrett and his vigilantes tried to burn down my legally owned property," Tom responded, rising to his feet. "They endangered lives, destroyed buildings, and threatened my guests with violence, all without legal authority." "Guests?" Peters sneered. "You mean the runaways you were hiding? I mean the Washington family. James Washington, who fought for the Union in the 54th Massachusetts, one of the most decorated colored regiments in the war. A man traveling legally with his wife and children to California, where he has legitimate employment waiting." Tom's voice carried clearly through the room. "A family whose 6-year-old daughter fell ill on the journey and needed medical care." "Doctor." Morrison stood beside Tom. "As Emma Washington's physician, I can confirm that she was suffering from pneumonia and would have died without proper treatment. Offering shelter to a sick child and her family is not a crime. It's basic human decency." The debate raged for over an hour with supporters and opponents of Blackwater trading accusations and counter-arguments. Tom noticed that the town had divided almost evenly those who viewed the ranch as a dangerous radical outpost versus those who respected Jeremiah's long history of quiet assistance to those in need. Finally, Mayor Davidson called for order. "Before we vote on the motion to revoke Blackwater's charter, Mr. McKenna has requested the opportunity to present certain documents for the council's consideration." Tom approached the council table, placing Jeremiah's packet before them. "These are the legal deeds to Blackwater Ranch and its surrounding properties, all properly filed and registered. Also included are letters from various officials acknowledging the legitimate humanitarian work conducted there over the years." The council members examined the documents with growing consternation, particularly when they came to the letter from the Supreme Court Justice praising Jeremiah's commitment to the true spirit of Reconstruction. "These appear to be in order," the town clerk admitted reluctantly. "The property rights are clear." "Furthermore," Tom continued, "I have here sworn statements from 12 residents of Millfield testifying that Nathan Garrett and his men arrived at my property with torches and weapons without legal authority and proceeded to destroy buildings and threaten lives." Sheriff Clayton stepped forward. "I can confirm these accounts. My deputies and I witnessed the latter part of the attack and were forced to intervene when Garrett attempted to shoot Mr. McKenna in cold blood." A hushed tension fell over the room as the council conferred in whispers. Finally, Mayor Davidson cleared his throat. "In light of the documentation presented and the testimony of Sheriff Clayton, the council finds no legal basis to revoke Blackwater's charter at this time." He held up his hand to quiet the immediate protests from Garrett's supporters. "However, given the disruption to public order, we require assurances that similar incidents will not occur in the future." Tom nodded. "I intend to rebuild Blackwater as my uncle envisioned it, a place of healing for both animals and people who have nowhere else to turn. I cannot control the actions of those who oppose this work, but I can promise that all activities on my property will remain within the bounds of law." As the meeting disbanded, Tom found himself surrounded by townspeople, some offering support, others making veiled threats, many simply curious about the Union sharpshooter who had inherited a Confederate colonel's controversial legacy. Through the crowd, Tom caught sight of a young boy, no more than 12, watching him with undisguised admiration. The same boy he realized who had ridden to alert Clayton about Garrett's attack. "Thank you," Tom said, approaching him. "You saved lives last night." The boy straightened proudly. "My pa says Colonel McKenna helped our family when no one else would. Said we owe him a debt that doesn't end just 'cause he died." "What's your name, son?" "William, sir. William Santos, Jr." Tom felt a jolt of recognition. "Your grandfather was William Santos, the man who cared for the animals." The boy nodded. "Grandpa's gone to live with my aunt in San Antonio, but he told me to keep an eye on Blackwater. Said it was important. It is important, Tom agreed. More than I realized. As Tom and Dr. Morrison walked back toward Blackwater through the gathering darkness, they discussed the council's decision and what it meant for the future. It's only a temporary victory, Dr. Morrison said. Garrett has too many allies for this to be the end. I know, Tom replied. But it gives us time to rebuild, to strengthen our position. Our position? She asked, a slight smile in her voice. Does that mean you're staying? Tom was quiet for a moment, considering. Just days ago, he had arrived at Blackwater with no intention of remaining a drifter, still running from his grief, from his past, from himself. Now, despite the destruction, despite the enemies arrayed against them, he felt rooted in a way he hadn't since Sarah's death. I'm staying, he said finally. This is where I'm supposed to be. As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, Tom stopped short. In the valley below, dozens of lanterns bobbed like fireflies around the ruins of the barn. But these weren't attacking forces. These were neighbors, townspeople working by lantern light to clear debris and salvage what could be saved. Among them moved the animals that had returned: horses, cattle dogs, and chickens, seeming to understand that this activity was for their benefit. And leading them, her silver coat gleaming in the lantern light, was Belle, directing the work as surely as any human foreman. They came, Dr. Morrison said softly, just as they did for Jeremiah when he first started. Why? Tom asked, genuinely bewildered. After everything that happened. Because this is bigger than one man's vision now. It's become part of the community's identity, the belief that healing is possible, that enemies can become allies, that the broken can be made whole. As they descended toward the lantern-lit valley, Tom felt something shift inside him, not an end to grief, but a transformation of it. Sarah was still gone, but her dream lived on in this place. Jeremiah was still gone, but his legacy continued through the hands now working to rebuild what had been destroyed. And Tom himself, the broken soldier, the grieving husband, was changing too, finding purpose in continuing their work, in standing for something larger than his own pain. What he couldn't know as he joined the workers clearing the barn site was that Garrett's allies were already planning their next move, that the victory at the council meeting had only deepened their determination to erase Blackwater and its symbol of reconciliation from the Texas landscape, that somewhere in the darkness beyond the lantern light, men gathered around a different kind of fire, making plans to ensure that Thomas McKenna's resurrection of Jeremiah's vision would be short-lived, and that the true test of Blackwater and of Tom himself was yet to come. The rebuilding of Blackwater Ranch began at dawn, the day after the council meeting. Neighbors arrived with tools, lumber, and willing hands, forming work parties that tackled the ruins with methodical efficiency. Tom worked alongside them, his body aching from burns and exhaustion, but his mind clearer than it had been in months. By midday, the remains of the barn had been cleared, and the foundation for a new structure was taking shape. The Washington family remained hidden in the root cellar during daylight hours, emerging only after sunset to help with the indoor repairs. Their departure had been arranged for the following night. A wagon would arrive from the east, driven by a trusted ally of the Underground Railroad, to transport them to the next safe house on their journey to California. As Tom helped raise a support beam for the new barn, he caught sight of Dr. Morrison speaking with Sheriff Clayton near the edge of the property. Their expressions were grave, their conversation intense. When Clayton departed, Dr. Morrison approached Tom, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "There's news from town," she said, her voice low. "The prosecutor is refusing to pursue charges against Garrett." Tom set down his hammer. What? How is that possible? Clayton has a dozen witnesses to the attack. Garrett's claiming it was a legitimate posse pursuing escaped criminals. His allies are backing his story. Her mouth tightened with anger. He'll be released by nightfall. The news settled like lead in Tom's stomach. And the Washingtons, they need to leave tonight. I've already sent word to our contact to come immediately rather than wait until tomorrow. She hesitated. That's not all. Clayton says there's talk among the Brotherhood about settling things permanently. They're not just coming after Blackwater anymore, Thomas. They're coming after you. Tom nodded, unsurprised. He'd made an enemy of Garrett in a way Jeremiah never had. The old colonel had been a Confederate officer, eccentric in his later years perhaps, but still one of their own. Tom was a Yankee, a former Union sharpshooter, an outsider who had humiliated Garrett publicly. Such men didn't forgive, and they rarely forgot. "We'll be ready," Tom said simply. As the workers broke for the midday meal, Tom made his way to the southeast corner of the property. The old oak Jeremiah had mentioned stood alone on a small rise, its massive trunk gnarled with age. At its base, 3 stones indeed formed a rough triangle, unremarkable unless one knew what to look for. It took Tom nearly an hour of careful digging to uncover what lay beneath a trap door, leading to a small underground chamber reinforced with brick and timber. Inside, he found exactly what Jeremiah had promised: rifles, pistols, ammunition, even a small cannon that could be mounted on a wagon bed. Enough firepower to hold off a small army or a large brotherhood. But it was the other items in the cache that truly surprised him. Uniforms, both Union blue and Confederate gray, carefully preserved in oiled cloth. Medical supplies, far more extensive than what might be expected for a ranch. Maps of the surrounding counties marked with routes, safe houses, and potential danger points. This wasn't just a weapons cache. It was a wartime headquarters kept ready years after the official peace. When Tom returned to the main house, he found Dr. Morrison waiting on the porch with a slender package wrapped in oilcloth. "This arrived for you," she said, handing him the parcel. "A rider brought it from Austin this morning." Inside was a sword. A cavalry officer's saber meticulously maintained its blade gleaming in the afternoon light. A note accompanied it, written in an unfamiliar hand. Captain McKenna. This was Colonel Jeremiah McKenna's service weapon, carried through the war between the states and surrendered at Appomattox. Before his death, he asked that it be passed to you should you accept the responsibility of Blackwater Ranch. The colonel believed that true reconciliation could only come when former enemies recognized their common humanity. He spoke often of the Union sharpshooter who shot him at Gettysburg, a man who had every right to kill him, but whose bullet was placed with such precision that it allowed for survival. He considered this an act of mercy, whether intentional or not. The sword is both symbol and practical tool. May it serve you as faithfully as it served him. Respectfully, Judge Samuel Carter Austin. Texas. Tom ran his fingers along the blade, feeling the weight of history it carried. He had fired the shot that day at Gettysburg with the cold calculation of a marksman aiming for center mass as he'd been trained. Had some unconscious impulse altered his aim? Had Providence guided the bullet? Or had it simply been luck that allowed Jeremiah to survive? What should have been a fatal wound? Whatever the truth, Jeremiah had interpreted it as mercy, and had built his second life around extending that same mercy to others. As evening approached, Tom gathered the workers to thank them for their efforts. Most would return the following day to continue the rebuilding, but a few, those most loyal to Jeremiah's memory, lingered after the others departed. "We know what's coming, Captain McKenna," said an older man named Henry, who had helped lay the foundation for the new barn. "Garrett won't let this stand. When he moves against you, we'll stand with you." Tom was touched by the offer but shook his head. "I appreciate that, Henry, but I can't ask you to risk your lives or your families. This is my fight now." "It's more than your fight," Henry insisted. "It's about what Blackwater means to this community, a place where the war really ended, where healing began." He gestured to the other men who had stayed behind. "Every one of us has a story about how the Colonel helped us or our families. Some of us fought for the South, some for the North. But here we found common ground." Tom looked at the faces around him, weathered, determined, united in purpose, despite their different pasts. This, he realized, was Jeremiah's true legacy, not just the ranch or the Underground Railroad, but the community he had fostered, the reconciliation he had embodied. "All right," Tom said finally, "but we do this smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." As darkness fell, they made their preparations. The Washingtons were moved to a wagon hidden in a grove near the eastern boundary, ready for quick departure when their escort arrived. The remaining animals were secured in the paddocks farthest from the main buildings. Weapons from Jeremiah's cache were distributed to those who knew how to use them. Dr. Morrison had refused to leave despite Tom's insistence. "I was part of this before you arrived," she told him firmly. "I'll see it through." Tom assigned her to the house where she could provide medical attention if needed while staying relatively protected. Belle, to everyone's surprise, stationed herself at the front gate, as alert as any sentry despite her advanced age. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the valley. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness, each creak and rustle in the darkness triggering heightened vigilance. Midnight came and went, with no sign of Garrett or his men, nor of the wagon that was supposed to collect the Washingtons. It was James who first heard the approach of horses, not from the direction of town, but from the east, where the rescue wagon was expected. "Something's wrong," he said, joining Tom at the edge of the property. "Too many riders." Tom listened carefully. James was right. What approached was not a single wagon, but multiple mounted men moving with the practiced coordination of a military unit. He grabbed his field glasses, focusing on the tree line, where the eastern trail emerged. What he saw chilled his blood. Riders in gray coats, at least a dozen surrounding a wagon, driven by a man whose bloody face was barely recognizable. In the back of the wagon, a woman and child lay bound and gagged. "They've captured our contacts," Tom said grimly, "and they're using them as bait." James's expression hardened. "My family stays here. We'll find another way out." "There may not be time." Tom handed him the field glasses. "They'll search the property thoroughly when they arrive, and next time Clayton might not be able to protect us with legal maneuvers." As they watched, the riders halted at the edge of the property. One man, not Garrett, but clearly in command, rode forward slightly, calling out across the darkness. "McKenna, we know you're harboring runaways. Send them out now and the rest of you can live. Resist, and we burn everything to the ground this time. For good." Tom recognized the voice, Councilman Peters Garrett's chief ally on the town council. The man had exchanged his respectable town clothes for the gray coat of the Brotherhood, revealing his true allegiance. "Where's Garrett?" Tom called back. Peters laughed, the sound ugly in the quiet night. "The Colonel is gathering our main force. We're just the advance party, McKenna. You've got 1 hour to surrender the runaways, or we come in shooting." As Peters and his men withdrew to the tree line to wait, Tom gathered his allies in the main house. The situation was dire. They were outnumbered, and if Peters was telling the truth, Garrett was bringing even more men. "We need to get the Washingtons out," Tom said. "That's the priority." "How?" Dr. Morrison asked. "They've blocked the eastern route, and the main road to town will certainly be watched." Tom spread out one of Jeremiah's maps on the table. "There's a third way." He traced a line with his finger, a route heading south through rough country before turning west toward the next county. Jeremiah marked it as an emergency escape path. It's difficult terrain, but it bypasses both the main road and the eastern trail. Henry studied the route. "That crosses Blackwater Creek at Devil's Ford. It's dangerous this time of year. The spring rains have the water running high." "It's their best chance," Tom insisted. James Washington, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. "I'll take it, but I'll need a guide who knows the way." Young William Santos, Jr., who had insisted on staying to help, despite his father's objections, spoke up from the corner where he'd been quietly observing. "I know that route, sir. Grandfather showed me all the escape paths. I can lead them." Tom looked at the boy no more than 12 years old, but with the determined expression of someone much older. "It's dangerous, William." "Grandfather would expect it of me," the boy said simply. "He always said Blackwater protects its own." While the others prepared the Washingtons for their journey, Tom took Henry aside. "I need you to take half our men and create a diversion on the main road. Make it look like we're trying to break through that way with the Washingtons." Henry nodded grimly. "Drawing their fire while the family escapes south. It could work." "Be careful," Tom said. "No heroics, just enough noise and movement to convince them." "What about you?" Henry asked. Tom's expression hardened. "I'll be having a conversation with Councilman Peters." The plan was set in motion with practiced efficiency. The Washingtons, guided by young William, slipped away through a hidden trail behind the root cellar. Henry and 5 men mounted horses and prepared for their diversion on the main road. The remaining defenders positioned themselves around the property, ready to repel Peters and his advance force. Tom found Dr. Morrison in the kitchen preparing bandages and medicines for the confrontation she knew was coming. "You should go with the Washingtons," he told her. "You'd be safer." She didn't look up from her work. "I've never chosen safety over duty, Captain. I didn't during the war, and I won't now." "Elizabeth," Tom said, using her first name for the first time. "If this goes badly—" "It won't," she interrupted. "Jeremiah faced worse odds during the war. So did you." She finally met his eyes. "Besides, I made a promise." "To whom?" "To Sarah." Tom stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You knew Sarah?" "Not in person," Dr. Morrison explained, "but we corresponded after she began writing to Jeremiah. She asked me to look after you if anything happened to her." A sad smile touched her lips. "She worried about you, Thomas, about the war that still lived inside you. She hoped Blackwater might finally bring you peace." Before Tom could respond, a shout came from outside. Peters's ultimatum had expired. The attack was beginning. The first shots came from the eastern boundary, Peters' men charging toward the main house, expecting to find the Washingtons hidden inside. Tom's defenders responded with carefully placed fire, not aiming to kill, but to force the attackers to seek cover. Simultaneously, Henry's group burst from the western edge of the property, riding hard for the main road, as if attempting to break through with precious cargo. Peters immediately redirected half his force to pursue them, leaving the remaining men scattered and vulnerable. Tom seized the opportunity, moving swiftly through the shadows to outflank the attackers. He positioned himself behind a fallen tree at the edge of the clearing, rifle ready. When Peters rode past, barking orders to his men, Tom took careful aim not at the man, but at his horse's saddle strap. The shot cracked through the night, and Peters tumbled unceremoniously to the ground as his saddle slipped sideways. Before the councilman could recover, Tom was on him, pressing the barrel of his rifle against Peters's chest. "Call them off," Tom ordered, his voice cold. "Now." Peters's face twisted with hatred, but when he saw the resolve in Tom's eyes, the deadly focus of a trained sharpshooter, his bravado faltered. He shouted for his men to cease fire. As the shooting died down, Tom marched Peters toward the house at gunpoint. The councilman's men, seeing their leader captured, hesitated, unwilling to risk his life. "Tell them to drop their weapons and leave the property," Tom instructed. Peters complied, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. His men reluctantly obeyed, laying down their arms and retreating toward the eastern boundary. Tom knew it was only a temporary victory. They would regroup with Garrett's main force, but it bought precious time for the Washingtons to escape. Inside the house, Tom secured Peters to a chair, while Dr. Morrison tended to two defenders who had suffered minor wounds in the exchange. "This is kidnapping," Peters sputtered. "I'm an elected official." "This is a citizen's arrest," Tom corrected, "for trespassing, attempted murder, and conspiracy to violate federal civil rights laws. Sheriff Clayton will be very interested in your activities tonight, Councilman." "Clayton can't help you," Peters sneered. "By morning, he'll be removed from office. The Brotherhood has taken control of the county commission. It's over McKenna. Blackwater will be raised, and you'll hang as a traitor to Texas." Tom studied the man before him, not the community leader he pretended to be in public, but a bitter, hate-filled remnant of a war that should have ended 18 years earlier. "Why, Tom asked simply. "The war is over. Slavery is abolished. What are you still fighting for?" Peters's laugh was hollow. "You Yankees never understood. It wasn't just about slavery. It was about the right to determine our own destiny without Northern interference, about preserving a way of life." His eyes burned with fanatic intensity. "The war may have ended at Appomattox, but the struggle continues. And men like your Uncle Confederates, who betrayed their own people, they're worse than any Yankee." As dawn approached, Henry and his men returned dusty and exhausted, but largely unharmed. Their diversion had been successful, drawing off Peters's men long enough for the Washingtons to slip away to the south. "No sign of Garrett's main force yet," Henry reported. "But they're coming. Riders all over the county roads gathering for something big." Tom nodded grimly. "Get some rest while you can. We'll need everyone at full strength." When Henry had gone, Tom found himself alone with Dr. Morrison in the kitchen. She had finally completed her medical preparations and sat at the table, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "You should rest too," Tom told her. She shook her head. "Too much to do." She gestured toward the window where the first hints of dawn illuminated the half-rebuilt barn. "What's your plan, Thomas? We can't hold off Garrett's entire brotherhood." "No," Tom agreed. "But we can make our stand count for something." He explained his strategy not just to defend Blackwater, but to expose Garrett and the Brotherhood for what they truly were. Clayton might soon be removed from office, but there were still federal marshals in Austin who would act if provided with sufficient evidence. The testimony of Peters, combined with the documents found at Garrett's ranch, might be enough to bring federal intervention. "It's a dangerous gamble," Dr. Morrison warned. "If the marshals don't arrive in time, then we'll have done what we could." Tom's hand went to the wedding ring he still wore on a cord around his neck. Sarah once wrote that every living thing deserves a second chance. Jeremiah believed that too. They both gave their lives trying to create a place where that belief could become reality. I can do no less. As they spoke, Belle approached the kitchen window, nickering softly to attract their attention. The old cavalry mount had remained vigilant throughout the night, patrolling the boundaries of the property as if she understood the danger they faced. "She knows," Dr. Morrison said softly. "Animals sense these things before we do." Tom went to the window, placing his hand against the glass. Belle pressed her muzzle to the other side, creating a connection that transcended the barrier between them. In her dark eyes, Tom saw not fear, but resolve, the same steady courage she must have shown on countless battlefields during the war. "We'll protect them," Tom promised, though whether to Belle, to Sarah's memory, or to himself he wasn't sure. "Whatever comes." What came as the morning sun climbed higher was worse than Tom had anticipated. Riders appeared on every boundary of the property, not just the couple dozen he had expected, but over 100 men wearing pieces of Confederate gray, armed with rifles, pistols, and in some cases military-grade weapons that must have been hidden away since the war's end. At their center, mounted on a black stallion and dressed in a complete Confederate officer's uniform, rode Nathan Garrett. He carried a battle flag, not the Confederate national flag, but the distinctive Southern Cross that had flown over so many battlefields during the bloodiest days of the war. The message was clear. This was not just an attack on Blackwater. This was a resurgence of the conflict that had torn the nation apart, a rejection of the peace that had been established at such terrible cost. Tom gathered his defenders, now reduced to just 10 men, including himself, on the porch of the main house. "Anyone who wants to leave, now's the time," he told them. "What's coming isn't just about Blackwater anymore. It's about something bigger." Not a single man moved. "Then we make our stand," Tom said simply. "Not just for Blackwater, but for what it represents." As Garrett's forces surrounded the property, arranging themselves with military precision, Tom positioned his men carefully, not just to defend the house, but to protect the animals that remained. The reconstructed paddocks were reinforced water sources, secured escape routes, prepared for the event they needed to release the creatures to save their lives. Belle refused to be corralled instead, taking up position directly before the house, as if preparing to charge the enemy single-handed. The sight of the ancient cavalry mount standing defiant in the morning light, her silver coat gleaming like armor, gave Tom a strange comfort. Garrett advanced to parley, halting his black stallion at the edge of the yard. "Last chance, McKenna, surrender the property and leave Texas forever. Refuse and we'll burn you out." Tom stepped off the porch, walking forward to meet Garrett halfway. He carried Jeremiah's saber, not drawn, but visible at his side. "This ends today, Garrett," Tom called. "One way or another." Garrett's face twisted with contempt. "You're outnumbered 10-1, Yankee. Your sheriff can't help you. Your Negro friends are gone. You've got nothing left to fight for." "That's where you're wrong," Tom replied. "I'm fighting for the same thing I fought for during the war. The idea that this country belongs to all its people. That freedom isn't just a word, but a right worth dying for." "Pretty speeches won't save you," Garrett sneered. "The Brotherhood has declared you an enemy of Texas. The penalty is death." Tom's hand went to the hilt of Jeremiah's sword. "You're not Texas, Garrett. You're just a bitter old man who can't accept that the world has moved on without him." The insult struck home. Garrett's face flushed dark with rage. "Attack!" he roared to his men. "Burn it all!" The Brotherhood surged forward, a wave of gray breaking against Blackwater's fragile defenses. Gunfire erupted from all sides as Tom's men fought to hold their positions. Tom himself drew Jeremiah's saber, not out of any practical consideration. A sword was little use against rifles, but as a symbol of the legacy he now defended. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as either a miracle or the most remarkable coincidence of timing imaginable. As Garrett's forces closed in on the main house, a bugle call split the air, the distinctive notes of cavalry on the charge. From the direction of town came riders not in Confederate gray, but in the blue uniforms of the United States Cavalry, their sabers drawn and gleaming in the morning sun. At their head rode not a military officer, but Sheriff Clayton, his badge catching the light as he led the charge directly into Garrett's right flank. Simultaneously, from the western boundary, came another force, civilians mounted on farm horses, led by a tall figure Tom recognized as Judge Carter from Austin, the same man who had sent Jeremiah's sword. With them rode federal marshals, their badges and authority carrying the weight of national law. The Brotherhood forces caught by surprise, and suddenly facing opponents who matched their numbers faltered in their attack. Many broke immediately, fleeing into the surrounding countryside. Others, the true believers, formed defensive positions around Garrett, who sat stunned on his black stallion, the battle flag drooping in his hand. Tom seized the moment, charging forward with Jeremiah's saber raised high. Belle, as if responding to some memory of battlefield commands, moved with him, her aged legs finding new strength as she galloped toward Garrett's position. The collision was both physical and symbolic. Union and Confederate past and future, hatred and healing, meeting one final time on a battlefield that straddled not states, but eras. Tom's blade met Garrett's hastily drawn pistol, knocking it from his hand with a precision born of countless hours of military training. Belle crashed into the black stallion, sending both animals and riders tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs and weaponry. When they separated, Tom found himself standing over Garrett Jeremiah's saber, pointed at the man's throat. The Confederate battle flag lay in the dust between them, torn and soiled, its symbolism suddenly hollow in the clear light of day. "It's over, Garrett," Tom said quietly. "The war ended 18 years ago. Let it go." For a moment, hatred burned in Garrett's eyes, with such intensity that Tom thought the man might lunge for his fallen pistol regardless of the sword at his throat. Then, with startling suddenness, something broke in Garrett's expression. Not surrender exactly, but perhaps recognition that his cause belonged to a past that could not be resurrected. "You've won nothing," Garrett spat. "This land will never accept your kind." "This land," Tom replied, "belongs to all of us. That's what we fought, for what men on both sides died believing, that America could be better than its worst impulses." As federal marshals moved in to take Garrett into custody, Sheriff Clayton approached Tom, his expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "Thought you could use some reinforcements," Clayton said dryly. "Judge Carter wired the governor when he heard what was happening. Turns out Austin doesn't much appreciate private armies operating in Texas, even if they do wear Confederate gray." "How did you get the uniforms?" Tom asked, gesturing toward the riders in Union blue. Clayton's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Found them in a trunk at the sheriff's office. Seems your Uncle Jeremiah predicted something like this might happen someday. Left them with instructions for when the past rises again." As the federal marshals rounded up what remained of the Brotherhood, Tom turned back toward the house. Dr. Morrison stood on the porch, her medical bag in hand, already tending to the wounded on both sides of the conflict. Belle approached slowly, her strength seemingly spent after her final charge. Tom stroked her neck, feeling the tremors that ran through her aged frame. "You did well, old girl," he murmured. "One last battle fought for the right reasons this time." The mare nickered softly, pressing her head against his shoulder in a gesture that felt like both acknowledgement and farewell. What Tom didn't know, couldn't know, was that the true test of his commitment to Blackwater was yet to come. That the victory over Garrett, decisive as it seemed, was merely the beginning of a longer struggle to transform the ranch from a personal sanctuary into a lasting institution. That the animals saved today would be joined by hundreds more in the years to come, and by people seeking their own second chances in a land still haunted by its past. For now he stood in the yard of the property he had inherited by chance and claimed by choice, surrounded by the legacy of two people he had never met in life, but whose vision had become his own. Jeremiah's saber still clutched in his hand, Sarah's wedding ring still hanging around his neck, both symbols of battles fought and sacrifices made in service to a single powerful belief that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. And as the sun climbed higher over Blackwater Ranch, illuminating the half-rebuilt barn, the scattered animals and the weary defenders, Tom felt something he had not experienced since holding Sarah's hand. As she slipped away from him, the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the weeks following the defeat of Garrett's Brotherhood, Blackwater Ranch underwent a transformation. The rebuilding accelerated as volunteers arrived daily not just from Millfield, but from surrounding counties as well. The new barn rose taller and stronger than its predecessor, designed with expanded areas for animal care and recovery. Stalls were constructed with careful attention to the needs of different creatures, from aging cavalry horses to injured farm animals. Tom worked alongside the volunteers, his body growing leaner and harder, with physical labor his mind clearer as purpose replaced grief. The nightmares that had haunted him since the War of Battles, thought of comrades lost, of Sarah's final moments, began to recede, replaced by dreamless sleep, born of honest exhaustion. Word of the Brotherhood's defeat spread throughout Texas, carried by newspapers that portrayed the confrontation in various lights, depending on their political leanings. Some painted Tom as a hero, defending the true spirit of Reconstruction against violent reactionaries. Others cast him as a Northern agitator, disrupting the established order. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. What couldn't be denied was the legal outcome. Garrett and his chief lieutenants, including Councilman Peters, faced federal charges for organizing an armed insurrection. The evidence gathered from Garrett's ranch detailed records of former slaves hunted down and returned to effective bondage, had been sent to Washington, triggering investigations into similar operations throughout the South. One morning in late summer, as Tom supervised the installation of the weather vane atop the completed barn, Sheriff Clayton arrived with news from Austin. "Judge Carter sends his regards," Clayton said, handing Tom a sealed envelope. "Says you'll want to read this right away." Inside was a formal document bearing the seal of the state of Texas, along with a personal note from the judge. Captain McKenna enclosed, "Please find the official charter for the Blackwater Foundation for Reconciliation and Recovery as approved by the governor's office. This legal designation protects the property and its mission in perpetuity, ensuring that neither local prejudice nor future political shifts can threaten its existence." The governor was particularly moved by the letters of support from both Union and Confederate veterans. "It seems your uncle's vision of healing the nation's wounds has found resonance in unexpected quarters. I have taken the liberty of establishing a trust fund in the colonel's name to support the foundation's work. Several prominent citizens in Austin have contributed generously, ensuring that Blackwater will never want for operating expenses. My warmest congratulations on this achievement, which represents not merely a personal victory, but a step toward the true reconciliation our nation so desperately needs. Your friend and ally, Judge Samuel Carter." Tom read the document twice, his hands trembling slightly. This was beyond anything he had anticipated. Not just temporary protection for Blackwater, but permanent legal status that would outlast his lifetime. "Congratulations," Clayton said, noting Tom's expression. "Not many men get to see their life's work secured so thoroughly." "It's not my work," Tom replied quietly. "It's Jeremiah's and Sarah's. I'm just the caretaker." Clayton nodded understanding. "Sometimes the greatest honor is continuing what others began." He looked around at the rebuilt ranch, at the animals grazing peacefully in the paddocks, at the volunteers still working on various projects. "You've done them proud, son." As Clayton departed, Dr. Morrison approached from the direction of the new infirmary, a small building adjacent to the main house where she now spent most of her days treating both animals and the occasional human patient. "Good news?" she asked, noting the document in Tom's hand. He handed her the charter, watching as she read it, her expression shifting from curiosity to surprise to quiet satisfaction. "The Blackwater Foundation," she said thoughtfully. "It has a certain ring to it." "It means we can continue the work," Tom said. "Officially, legally, permanently." Elizabeth smiled, the expression softening the lines that months of worry had etched around her eyes. Tom felt a warmth rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I was hoping, that is, if you're willing to stay on as the Foundation's physician." "I think," she said carefully, "that we might discuss the matter over dinner. I believe Mrs. Whitaker has been inquiring about when you might begin to consider the propriety of formal courtship." Tom felt himself flush like a schoolboy. The entire town had been watching the growing closeness between him and Dr. Morrison, with barely disguised interest, but he hadn't realized his feelings were quite so transparent. "I would like that," he said simply. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in gold and russet, Blackwater settled into new rhythms. The animals that had scattered during the Brotherhood's attack gradually returned, drawn by food safety and perhaps some deeper recognition of the sanctuary Tom had fought to preserve. New arrivals appeared almost daily, horses too old for farm work, cattle injured beyond commercial usefulness, dogs abandoned by families moving west. Each newcomer was examined by Dr. Morrison, treated if necessary, and integrated into the appropriate area of the ranch. Tom found himself developing Jeremiah's habit of naming each animal, recording their stories in a leather-bound journal similar to the one his uncle had kept. The human dimension of Blackwater's mission evolved as well. The Underground Railroad operation had been exposed during the confrontation with Garrett, but rather than abandoning it, Tom transformed it into an open legal operation, assisting freed people traveling west. The hidden basement became a regular way station where families could rest, receive medical care, and prepare for the next leg of their journey. Federal protection ensured that even those who disapproved of Blackwater's work could no longer threaten it directly. The Gray Brotherhood disbanded its members, either arrested, fled, or quietly returning to civilian life, as the fervor that had sustained their cause dissipated in the face of legal consequences. On a crisp October evening, Tom sat on the porch of the main house, Jeremiah's journal open beside him, making notes on the day's activities. Belle rested nearby, her silver coat gleaming in the last light of sunset, her breathing the slow, steady rhythm of deep contentment. The sound of hoofbeats drew Tom's attention to the main road. A single rider approached a young black man mounted on a bay gelding, leading a second horse that carried what appeared to be a child. Tom rose, recognizing the rider even at a distance. James Washington dismounted at the gate, his face breaking into a broad smile. "Captain McKenna, Dr. Morrison, said you'd still be here." The child on the second horse, Emma, now recovered from the pneumonia that had nearly claimed her life, slid to the ground and ran toward Tom, throwing her arms around his waist in an uninhibited embrace. Mr. Tom, we made it to California. We saw the ocean. Tom knelt to her level, marveling at the transformation. The sickly child he'd last seen, huddled in her mother's arms, was now vibrant with health and confidence. "Where's Mary?" Tom asked, looking back toward the road. "And the boys?" "Setting up our new home," James explained. "We found land in the Sacramento Valley. Good soil, good neighbors." His expression grew serious. "I came back to thank you, and to bring you something." From his saddlebag, James withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. "This belonged to my grandfather. He was a slave woodcarver in Virginia, one of the finest in the South. This was the last piece he made before he died, a year after he got his freedom." Tom accepted the box, carefully feeling the smoothness of wood worn by generations of handling. When he opened it, he found a medallion inside carved from dark walnut and polished to a deep luster. On one side was an image of a horse breaking free from chains. On the other, words burned into the wood: "Freedom is never given. It is earned and won." "It's beautiful," Tom said, deeply moved. "But I can't accept something so valuable to your family." James shook his head. "My grandfather made it to honor those who helped others find freedom. It belongs here at Blackwater." He looked around at the rebuilt ranch, at the animals grazing peacefully in the evening light. "This place saved us, Captain. Not just our lives, but our belief that there are still good people in this world willing to stand up for what's right." Emma tugged at Tom's sleeve. "Can I see Belle before we go? Mama says she's the bravest horse in Texas." Tom smiled. "She certainly is. Come on, I'll introduce you." As Emma approached the aging mare with appropriate reverence, Tom and James watched from a respectful distance. "We heard about the battle," James said quietly. "About Garrett and his brotherhood. The news reached all the way to California." "It wasn't just me," Tom replied. "A lot of good people stood up that day." James nodded. "That's how change happens, not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice." He looked directly at Tom. "Will you continue the work, helping others find their way west?" "As long as I'm able," Tom promised. "The Blackwater Foundation is officially chartered now. It can't be shut down by local sentiment or political pressure." Emma had managed to coax Belle to her feet and was now leading the old mare in a slow circle, chattering happily about their journey to California and the wonders they had seen along the way. The horse listened with the patient dignity that had become her hallmark, occasionally nickering softly as if in response. "She understands everything," Emma announced as she rejoined the adults. "She told me she's happy here." Tom smiled. "I think she is. We all are." James and Emma stayed only one night, needing to begin their return journey to California before winter made travel difficult. Their presence, brief as it was, reminded Tom of Blackwater's true purpose, not just as a sanctuary for animals, but as a waypoint in human journeys toward freedom and dignity. As October gave way to November, Tom began preparations for what promised to be a harsh winter. Additional shelters were constructed for the animals, food stores were laid in, and the main house was winterized with extra insulation and repairs to the fireplaces. Dr. Morrison Elizabeth, as Tom now called her in private, had taken up residence in a small cottage on the property, maintaining propriety while remaining close enough for daily work at the infirmary. Their courtship progressed with the careful deliberation of two people who had experienced profound loss and were cautious with new beginnings. On Thanksgiving Day, Tom organized a celebration for everyone who had helped rebuild Blackwater. Long tables were set up in the barn, which had been decorated with autumn harvest themes. Families from Millfield and surrounding farms brought dishes to share, creating a feast that represented the diverse culinary traditions of the community. Sheriff Clayton attended, as did Judge Carter, who had traveled from Austin for the occasion. Several of Jeremiah's old friends came as well, Confederate veterans, who had found their way to peace alongside their former Union adversaries. Even William Santos Sr. returned briefly from San Antonio, eager to see what had become of the ranch he had tended so faithfully during Jeremiah's final years. After the meal, as twilight gathered outside, Judge Carter rose to offer a toast. To Colonel Jeremiah McKenna, whose vision of reconciliation planted the seeds of what we see before us today, and to Captain Thomas McKenna, who has nurtured those seeds into fruit. Tom acknowledged the toast with a nod, but felt compelled to add his own. To Sarah McKenna, whose belief in second chances lives on in every animal that finds shelter here. And to Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, without whose courage and skill none of us would be here today. Elizabeth blushed at the public acknowledgement, but her eyes shone with quiet pleasure as she raised her glass in return. As the celebration continued, Tom slipped outside for a moment of solitude. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the Texas sky like diamond dust. Belle stood at the paddock fence, watching him with her usual quiet intensity. Tom approached, stroking her silver mane gently. "You doing all right, old girl?" Belle nickered softly, leaning into his touch. At nearly 30, she was well beyond the normal lifespan of a horse, particularly one who had survived the rigors of war and carried a battlefield injury. Yet she persisted, moving a little slower each day, but still maintaining her position as the unquestioned leader among the horses. "We did it," Tom told her. "We saved Blackwater, just like Jeremiah wanted, like Sarah dreamed." Belle's dark eyes seemed to hold understanding beyond mere animal intelligence, a wisdom born of survival, of enduring, when logic suggested surrender was the only option. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Tom mused. "That this was where I belonged, where we all belonged." The mare's only answer was a gentle nudge against his shoulder, the same gesture she had offered on his first day at Blackwater, when he had stood overwhelmed by the responsibility that had fallen to him. The sound of the barn door opening drew Tom's attention. Elizabeth stood framed in the golden light, her silhouette familiar and comforting. "Everything all right?" she called. "Just checking on Belle," Tom replied. "I'll be right in." As Tom rejoined the celebration, he found himself the center of questions about Blackwater's future. What new programs might the Foundation develop? Would they expand to assist wounded veterans, as well as animals? Had he considered establishing similar sanctuaries in other states? Tom answered thoughtfully, aware that what had begun as a personal journey of healing had evolved into something much larger, a model for reconciliation that extended beyond the boundaries of the ranch, beyond even the borders of Texas. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the ranch had settled into its nighttime quiet, Tom sat alone in Jeremiah's study, now his study contemplating the transformation of the past year. On the desk before him lay objects that chronicled his journey: Sarah's journal, Jeremiah's sword, the medallion from James Washington, and a small daguerreotype of himself as a young Union sharpshooter. Beside these he had placed a blank book, leather-bound with crisp, empty pages awaiting their purpose. He had purchased it in town the previous day, intending it to serve as the official record of the Blackwater Foundation. But as he sat with pen poised over the first page, Tom realized it would be more than a mere record of dates, events, and finances. It would be the continuation of a story that had begun long before his arrival, a story of healing in a land still wounded by conflict, of redemption for those who had lost their way, of second chances for creatures both human and animal who had been abandoned by a world moving too quickly to value their worth. Tom dipped his pen and began to write, the Blackwater Covenant. We, the caretakers of this land, and the creatures who find sanctuary upon it, do hereby pledge ourselves to the following principles: that every living being deserves compassion and the opportunity to heal from past wounds, whether physical or spiritual. That reconciliation between former enemies is not merely possible, but essential for true peace to flourish. That in caring for the abandoned, the broken, and the forgotten, we ourselves find healing that can be achieved in no other way. That the divisions which once tore this nation apart shall find no purchase here, where all are judged not by their origins or past allegiances, but by their present actions and future potential. That the legacy of those who established this sanctuary, Colonel Jeremiah McKenna and Sarah Elizabeth McKenna, shall be honored through continued service to their vision of a world where second chances are freely given and healing is always possible. This covenant we make freely, binding ourselves and all who follow to its fulfillment from this day forward, for as long as Blackwater Ranch stands as a beacon of hope in a world that too often forgets the value of mercy. As Tom signed his name beneath these words, he felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but the proper beginning of a story that would continue long after his own chapter had closed. The winter months passed in a rhythm of daily care and long-term planning. Elizabeth officially accepted the position of foundation physician, dividing her time between the ranch and her practice in town. Their courtship progressed at a pace that acknowledged both their growing feelings and their respect for the losses that had shaped them. Tom wrote regularly to James Washington in California, establishing Blackwater as a key station on what was becoming a formal network of assistance for freed people moving west. The basement that had once served as a hidden refuge was transformed into an open hospice where travelers could rest and recover before continuing their journeys. Animal rehabilitation techniques pioneered at Blackwater began to attract attention from veterinarians and ranchers throughout Texas. Tom found himself hosting visitors eager to learn methods for treating injuries and ailments that would previously have resulted in an animal being destroyed. Sheriff Clayton, re-elected, despite the Brotherhood's attempts to remove him, became a regular visitor, often bringing news of former Brotherhood members who had renounced violence and sought to make amends for their past actions. Some even volunteered at the ranch, finding in physical labor, alongside former enemies, a path to their own healing. Spring arrived with explosive green vigor, painting the Texas landscape with wildflowers and fresh grass. The animals at Blackwater thrived in the gentle warmth, particularly the older ones who had struggled through the winter months. All except Belle. The old cavalry mount had declined steadily since the first thaw, her movements growing stiffer, her once silver coat dulling despite careful grooming. Elizabeth had done everything possible, trying various treatments and medications, but age and the long-carried wound from Gettysburg were finally claiming their due. On a perfect April morning, with bluebonnets carpeting the fields and birdsong filling the air, Tom found Belle lying in her favorite spot beneath the oak tree on the eastern boundary. Her breathing was labored, her eyes half closed, but she nickered softly in recognition when Tom knelt beside her. "It's all right, old girl," Tom said gently, stroking her neck. "You've earned your rest." Elizabeth arrived moments later, medical bag in hand, though both knew there was nothing more to be done. She knelt opposite Tom, her experienced hands moving over Belle's body with gentle efficiency before finally resting on the mare's head. "She's ready," Elizabeth said softly. "She's just waiting for permission." Tom swallowed hard against the tightness in his throat. "Can she understand us?" "I believe she understands everything that matters." Tom leaned close to Belle's ear. "You can go now," he whispered. "You've done your duty. You've carried us all as far as you could. Jeremiah would be proud. I'm proud. It's time to rest." Belle's dark eyes fixed on Tom's face one last time, conveying something beyond words. Gratitude, perhaps, or simply recognition of a bond that transcended the usual boundaries between human and animal. Then, with a soft sigh, the tension left her body, and she was gone. They buried her beneath the oak tree, where she had fallen, marking the grave, with a simple stone carved with her name and the words, "Faithful beyond measure." As Tom placed Sarah's blue ribbon on the fresh earth, he was struck by the intertwining of lives that had led to this moment: Jeremiah, Sarah Bell himself, and countless others whose paths had crossed at Blackwater Ranch. That evening, as the sun set behind the western hills, casting golden light across the property, Tom and Elizabeth sat on the porch of the main house. The day's work was done, the animals settled for the night, a peaceful quiet descending over the ranch. "I've been thinking," Tom said after a comfortable silence, "about what Belle represented, about what Blackwater has become." Elizabeth turned to him, her expression attentive. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That healing isn't just about recovering from physical wounds or even emotional ones. It's about finding purpose in what remains." Tom looked out over the ranch at the new barn, the expanded paddocks, the infirmary where Elizabeth worked her daily miracles. Jeremiah could have remained bitter after Gettysburg, consumed by hatred for the enemy who shot him. Instead, he built this place, created something meaningful from his pain. "As you have," Elizabeth said softly. Tom nodded. "As we all have in our different ways." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. "Elizabeth, I've been carrying Sarah's wedding ring since the day she died. It's been a weight around my neck, a reminder of what I lost." "And now," she asked, her voice steady, though her hand trembled slightly in his, "now I understand that honoring her memory doesn't mean living in perpetual grief. It means carrying forward what she believed in, that broken things can be mended, that abandoned creatures deserve care, that love continues even after loss." Tom withdrew the ring from inside his shirt, the gold band gleaming in the fading light. "I'd like to place this with Belle, to acknowledge that one chapter has closed, so another can begin." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I think Sarah would approve. I think she'd want you to be happy, Thomas." As darkness fell over Blackwater Ranch, Tom made his way back to Belle's grave. Kneeling beside the fresh earth, he carefully buried the wedding ring that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, to Jeremiah, to Belle, to all who had guided him to this place of healing. "For everything." Cheesing, Tom looked up at the stars emerging in the Texas sky, the same stars that had watched over countless journeys of redemption on this land. Tomorrow would bring new animals to care for new travelers seeking sanctuary, new challenges to overcome. But for tonight, standing on ground made sacred by sacrifice and renewal, Thomas McKenna was at peace. The Blackwater Foundation would continue its work for generations to come, outlasting its founder, becoming a model for similar sanctuaries throughout the reunited nation. Veterans of later conflicts would find healing alongside abandoned animals and displaced people. The covenant Tom had written would be carved in stone at the entrance, welcoming all who sought second chances. But that was a story for another day. Tonight belonged to remembrance and gratitude for the winding path that had led a broken Union sharpshooter to become the caretaker of a Confederate colonel's dream, and in doing so to find his own redemption. As Tom walked back toward the house where Elizabeth waited, he felt the presence of those who had gone before. not as ghosts, but as foundations upon which something new and enduring had been built. In their memory, and for those yet to come, Blackwater Ranch stood as testament to the power of healing, the possibility of reconciliation, and the enduring promise that every living soul deserves a second chance. The end.